Actually, Guido did a good segue for me to talk about the Shiites because they are extremely important. And I'll let him answer the question that I asked him during the Q&A. Okay, so on Saturday, January 2nd, 2016, the Saudi authorities executed Shiite leader Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, a radical Shiite preacher who was arrested in 2012. Saudi embassy in Tehran was burned. Iranian leaders and Lebanese Hezbollah promised revenge. More on Nimr later. But Saudi Arabia, their anger about what was going on, this was followed by Bahrain, Sudan, and the UAE. They all broke off relations with Iran in one degree or another following the attacks on the Saudi installations. So the fact that the Saudi Shiites are in the news does not now mean that the issue of the Shiites' place in Saudi Arabia is a new issue. And we've just heard it. This is a boiling issue. And I'm a historian, and I will tell you that the Saudi Shiites, their place in the Saudi states, is a very old issue. It goes to the very essence, to the raison d'etat of Saudi Arabia as the paragon of Sunni Islam. First, a couple of important facts. It's impossible to arrive at an exact determination of the number of Saudi Shiites. They're between 10 and 15% of the population, and about 33% of the population in the eastern province, which is where most of them are concentrated. There are also some in the Hijaz, particularly in Medina, excuse me. The Shiites of Saudi Arabia, they have the misfortune to have had their fate always determined by outside forces, whether they be the Saudis of Najd or the Persians of Iran. The Saudis and the Iranians have a long history of enmity, punctuated with periods of good relations. Saudi Arabia Shiites have often found themselves caught in the middle. They've been both the object of Saudi persecution and disdain and the subject of Iranian recruitment to subvert the Saudi regime. Historically, the response of the Shiites has moved between dissimulation, accommodation, attempted reconciliation, and terrorism. The Shiites reject the official narrative of Saudi history, which portrays the capture of the area where most of the Shiites live, the eastern province, as a mythical unification of the Arabian Peninsula. For many of the Shiites, their homeland has been occupied since the capture of Al-Hassa by Ibn Saud in 1913. Deep in Shiite historical memory rests their persecution by the Saudis during the 18th and 19th century. Expanding into Iraq in the early 19th century, Saudi warriors famously destroyed the tomb of Imam Hussein in Karbala and the tomb of the Prophet's companions, the Sahaba in Mecca and Medina, all of which demonstrated the extreme enmity of Saudi Wahhabis that they held towards the Shiites. For the Wahhabis, various customs such as grave worship and praying for intercession for various saints and imams and even for the Prophet himself, this is the paramount act of shirk or polytheism, a severe accusation from which the Shiites have constantly suffered. The government, in fact, has its own concerns. Its base of support is amongst the Wahhabi anti-Shiite majority. It's a religious state, and it derives its legitimacy from a form of Islam that is almost, by definition, anti-Shiite. And there's a long history of Wahhabi anti-Shiite polemics and Shiite anti-Wahhabi polemics. The Wahhabi majority in Saudi Arabia expects the Saudis, as leaders of the Sunni world, to put the Shiites led by Iran in their place. And the Saudi government is loath to be seen as somehow placating their own Shiites. So there are two important political elements that constantly impact the fate of Saudi Shiites. One is internal, the relations with the Saudi ulama, the rank and file followers, and the legitimacy of the Saudi family, which they seek from these clerics. The other is external, Iran, Saudi Arabia's main political and religious rival across the Gulf. Saudi Shiites have really never felt part of the state, and the government has rarely given them a reason to feel in that way. First, of course, there is the Wahhabi ideology, pressure from and response to the Wahhabi ulama, the presence of the Shiites in a sensitive oil region, and the government's relationship with Iran. These combine to severely influence the fates of the Shiites in Saudi Arabia throughout their history. The ideology of Wahhabism that developed in the 18th century and spread and formed the basis of the Saudi state served the state well in mobilizing the disparate tribes and casting the Shiites in the role of the quintessential other, Muslims who were worse than Jews or Christians. To Sunnis in general, the Shiites are Rawafid, those who reject the first three rightly guided caliphs in favor of Ali and the Prophet's house, known as Ahl al-Bayt. But for the Wahhabis, they're worse than rejectionists. Okay? They are mushrikeen. They are associationists. They associate people, such as the imams in the Prophet's family, with God. And many of the Shiite practices are very different from the strong emphasis on Tawheed, the unity of the Godhead, in Salafi and in Wahhabi Islam. So the Shiites, again, are worse than the Jews. Religiously and socially, as history progressed in Saudi Arabia, the Shiites were marginalized in the emerging Saudi state. Sunni merchants were encouraged to settle in Al-Hassa and take over traditional Shiite commercial ventures. Shiites later would complain very much about this, that this dependence was forced on them unnudged, and it took away their interactions with the Shiite hinterland. Religious practices and institutions which were endemic to Shia Islam were severely curtailed. In 1927, Wahhabi ulama published a fatwa calling upon the Shiites to convert to Islam. Some of them did, others fled. Publication of religious texts was forbidden. All kinds of acts of the Muharram the Ashura celebrations, these were all forbidden. The Shiites were vilified in textbooks and generally made to feel as outcasts. There were also economic implications of this. They were kept out of important jobs, and in the oil fields in the 50s they rioted, and these were put down quite severely. Well, as history progressed, two trends developed among Saudi Shiites. The first, in the 79 and 80, there was another serious uprising. They called the Intifada of the Eastern Province that developed. And these riots were very firmly crushed. And as a result of the crushing of this riots, two trends developed. One trend among the Shiites sought accommodation, an ability to have some kind of cultural freedom. This was led by Sheikh Hassan as-Safar, and he reached an accommodation with the government leadership. But there was another branch, another trend known as Hizballah al-Hijaz, which followed Imam Khomeini and talked about setting up a wilayat al-faqih, a state led by a Muslim jurisprudent. And this branch has engaged in several terrorist attacks. Now back to Sheikh Nimr. He was executed in January 16, and he seems to have sympathized with this more violent trend, although it is difficult to pigeonhole him entirely. There's no doubt that the most significant recent event for Saudi Shiites was the downfall of Saddam Hussein in April 2003. The Shiites felt empowered, even emboldened. Najaf, the heart of Shiism, was liberated. Do you know where this is coming from? Sorry. Seeing millions of their Iraqi brethren freely carrying out the rituals of Ashura, some Saudi Shiites felt their time had arrived in Saudi Arabia. that now it was time for the Shiites to get their due. And we had a lot of statements at that time talking about a state based on the religious teachings of the Prophet and so on and so forth. And we had a lot of Shiites coming out and expressing their hopes that with the end of the Ba'ath, their own situation would improve tremendously. But even though this gave rise to the hopes of Shiites in Iraq, the rise of the Shiites in Iraq gave hope to the Saudi Shiites, the possibility that Iraq would become a Shiite-led state brought into focus the problematique of the situation of Saudi Arabian Shiites. And their loyalty was taken into question, or was brought into question by the Saudi leadership. Now, they were lucky that Crown Prince at the time, Crown Prince Abdallah, was actually a supporter of reconciliation, and we have a couple of good years, okay? 2003 for a couple of more years, when Abdallah has a photograph taken, then Crown Prince Abdallah has a photograph taken with Hassan al-Safar, the leader of the kind of more moderate wing of the Shiites, which is, if you know Saudi politics, that's kind of huge.
He's holding his hand.
Yeah. So that's a big signal. And then, of course, 2005, Abdallah comes to the throne. There's some elections to municipal council. Some Shiites get elected, and they're really overjoyed at Abdallah. They think, their moment has finally come. And busloads of, this is unprecedented, busloads of leaders from the eastern province travel to Riyadh to give their loyalty to Abdallah, to Abdallah. One Shiite activist was quoted as saying, "I've never seen anything like this." But the problem is that among many Saudis, the idea that the Shiites are more loyal to Iran than Saudi Arabia is quite well entrenched. And after the Israeli-Hezbollah war of 2006, where Hezbollah was widely perceived, even in the Arab world, as initiating this war, the Saudis condemned Hezbollah for initiating this war. This caused a great deal of tension within Saudi Arabia because there were demonstrations within the eastern province in support of Hezbollah, but the Saudi government had opposed Hezbollah. And this led to a whole slew of I would say scare tactics by the Saudis, saying there's this huge wave of conversion to Shiism, to Shi'u is sweeping now the entire Middle East. And the Saudis said that they had to stand in the door and stop this. As the King Abdallah called Saudi Arabia the marja, the source of emulation for all Sunnis. And they had to stand and prevent this expansion. So, you have really your ups and downs. There has been, I would say, a general improvement. They are allowed to hold to publish Shiite works, to hold their commemorations. So in that way, things did improve. But the problem came again with the so-called Arab Spring, when the Shiites felt they could go all out and no holds were barred. And if there was one place in Saudi Arabia where there was a so-called Arab Spring, it was there. And it was sustained, and it lasted a while. And this is really the only Arab Spring activity in Saudi Arabia. This was originally meant in support of the Shiite uprising in neighboring Bahrain, but they became violent, they were met with violence, and these demonstrations developed a life of their own. And they were really met with an iron fist. And as far as Bahrain, the Saudis sent in armored personnel carriers and other weapons across the causeway into Bahrain and put that down. I think it was Greg or Guido mentioned that Bahrain is a Saudi protectorate. I would say that the Saudis probably look at Bahrain a bit like America looks at Puerto Rico. Kind of almost part of the country, not exactly. And I wouldn't put it beyond them to actually annex Bahrain if they felt it was one of those monarchies that was going to go over. Now, back to Sheikh Nimr, and this is, I'll finish with this. Sheikh Nimr had been hiding since the protests of 2009. He reappeared in February 2011. He gave a fiery speech calling for freedom, several more speeches like this. No direct calls for violence, but saying that they were willing to be martyrs. He was accused of sedition, and inciting to violence. And when Naif, the former, by that time I guess he was Crown Prince as well. Yeah, I was Crown Prince as well, and the Minister of Interior. When he died in 2012, he appeared on a video calling for the worms to eat his body. So you don't exactly do that in Saudi Arabia, okay? So he was arrested in July 2012. His arrest led to clashes, some of them armed. And the way which he was arrested, which was caught on video, everything today is caught on video. He was shot in the leg. He was thrown in the back of a patrol car. This enraged protests even further. Now, protests have continued on and off since his arrest in 2012. Okay, and there were since 2012 there were continuing arrests of Shiites, usually on charges of spying for Iran. Now, I think what we have here is a situation where Saudi Arabia feels threatened by Iran, and their local Shiites are going to feel the brunt of that. And I think the execution of Nimr, by the way, with other Sunni people, other Sunni oppositionists, but he got the most press, is primarily a signal to Iran that we will do this to your people. So again, Saudi Shiites have paid the price of regional rivalries and Saudi anti-Shiism. Whenever the Saudi regime seeks to bolster its Sunni credentials, it is paid for this with Shiite coin. Of course, to make matters worse, the Shiites have been the subject to murderous attacks by IS themselves. We've heard that. And we're just going to see more of a crackdown on this as the feeling against Iran grows stronger. Let's not forget, October 2011, now Foreign Minister Adel Jubeir was the subject of an abortive assassination attempt by Iran. So this is felt very strongly. Now, to sum up, I'll say one thing. These things are continuing. Just earlier this month, a court in Saudi Arabia sentenced 4 men to death in connection with attacks on security forces in the Shiite area of the country. These are attacks by Shia. And so we're going to see, I think, more and more of this, and I think that as long as the Saudis feel threatened internally by whoever it could be, and by Iraq from outside, the Shiites will continue to pay the price of being the ultimate other in Saudi Arabia.